We are going to make our way through quite a few chapters here. We're going to do 15 through 25. So, GWL friends, as we read, feel free to pause the video, as I know you have some reading responses to go along with these chapters. So listen along, read along, and then go ahead and answer questions or work on your list that you're making about the different characters, and then feel free to continue to read. Okay, so starting in chapter 15. Then the king ordered Herod cleaned and hung with decorations. Hundreds of hands, men and women, hurried to make the great hall ready. Golden tapestries were lined along the walls for a host of visitors to see and take pleasure in. But that glorious building was bent and broken. Its iron hinges cracked and sprung from their corners all around the hall. Only its roof was undamaged when the blood-stained demon burst out of Herod, desperately breaking Beowulf's grip, running wildly from what no one escapes. Struggle and writhe as he will. Wanting to stay, we go. All beings here on God's earth, wherever it is written that we go, taking our bodies from death's cold bed to the unbroken sleep that follows life's feast. Then Hrothgar made his way to the hall. It was time, and his heart drew him to the banquet. No victory was celebrated better, by more or by better men and their king. A mighty host and famous, they lined the benches, rejoicing. The king and Raffel, his nephew, Raffel, that's just fun to say, Raffel. They toasted each other and raised mead cups high under Herod's great roof, their speech courteous and warm. King and people were one. None of the Danes was plotting. No treachery hid in their smiles. Healfdene's son gave Beowulf a golden banner, a fitting flag to signal his victory, and gave him as well a helmet and a coat of mail and an ancient sword. They were brought to him while the warriors watched. Beowulf drank to those presents, not ashamed to be praised, richly rewarded in front of them all. No ring giver has given 4 such gifts, passed such treasures through his hands with the grace and warmth that Hrothgar showed. The helmet's brim was wound with bands of metal, rounded ridges to protect whoever wore it from swords swung in the fiercest battles, shining iron edges in hostile hands. And then the protector of warriors, Lord of the Danes, ordered 8 horses led to the hall, and into it 8 steeds with golden bridles. One stood with a jeweled saddle on its back, carved like the king's war seat it was. It had carried Hrothgar when that great son of Healfdene rode to war, and each time carried him wherever the fighting was most fierce and his followers had fallen. Then Beowulf had been honored by both the gifts Hrothgar could have given him, horses and weapons. The king commanded him to use them well. Thus, that guardian of Denmark's treasures had repaid a battle fought for his people by giving noble gifts, had earned praise for himself from those who tried to know the truth. 16. And more, the Lord of Herod ordered treasure gifts for each of the gates who'd sailed with Beowulf and still sat beside him. Ancient armor and swords, and for the one murdered by Grendel, gold was carefully paid. The monster would have murdered again and again had not God and the hero's courage turned fate aside. Then and now men must lie in their Maker's holy hands, moved only as he wills. Our hearts must seek out that will. The world and its long days full of labor brings good and evil. All who remain here meet both. Hrothgar's hall resounded with the harp's high call, with songs and laughter and the telling of tales. Stories sung by the court poet as the joyful Danes drank and listened, seated along their mead benches. So just like what happened in a previous chapter, we're taking a break from a battle. Another battle is coming, but they're in the mead hall and they're telling stories. And so here we have a poet. You've got these clues here. They're telling you a story is coming. So we're going to flash back and remember a story from the past. He told them of Finn's people, a attacking Hanaf with no warning, half wiping out that Danish tribe and killing its king. Finn's wife, Hanaf's sister, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I don't know. Hanaf? We're just going with it. So Finn's wife was the sister of the guy that Finn killed. Hanaf's sister learned what good faith was worth to her husband. His honeyed words and treachery cost her 2 beloved lives, her son and her brother, both falling on spears guided by fate's hand. How she wept. And when morning came, she had reason to mourn, to weep for her dead, her slaughtered son, and the bloody corpse of his uncle, both the men she most dearly loved, and whose love she could trust to protect her. But Finn's troops, too, had fallen to Danish spears. Too few were left to drive the Danes to their death. To force Hanaf's follower, Hengist, to flee the hall where they fought and he'd stayed, Finn offered them, instead of more war, words of peace. There would be no victory. They would divide the hall and the throne. Half would go to the Danes, half would go to Finn's followers. When gifts were given, Finn would give Hengist and his soldiers half. Share shining rings, silver and gold, with the Danes, both sides equal, all of them richer, all of their purses heavy, every man's heart warm with the comfort of gold. So Finn is kind of making a deal. Let's just kind of make everything even. We're not going to fight anymore. We're going to have peace, and we'll just split all this money. Both sides accepted peace and agreed to keep it. Finn swore it with solemn oaths. What Wiseman had written was his word as well as theirs. He and the brave Hengist would live like brothers. Neither leaders nor led would break the truce, would not talk of evil things, remind the Danes that the men they served killed Hanaf, their lord. They had no king and no choice, and he swore that his sword would silence wagging tongues if Frisian warriors stirred up hatred and brought back up the past. So he makes a deal. Let's not talk about what's happened between us. If my soldiers bring it up, off with the reds. A funeral pyre was prepared and gold was brought. Hanaf's dead body was dressed for burning, and the others with him. Bloody mail shirts could be seen and golden helmets, some carved with boar heads, all battle hard and as useless now as the corpses that still wore them. Soldier after soldier. Then Hanaf's sister, Finn's sad wife, gave her son's body to be burned in that fire. The flames, charring his uncle, would consume both kinsmen at one. Then she wept again, and weeping sang the dead's last praise. The Danish king was lifted up into place. Smoke went curling up. Logs roared. Remember, the king here is her brother. Logs roared. Open wounds split and burst. Skulls melted. Blood came bubbling down. And the greedy fire demons drank flesh and bones from the dead of both sides, until nothing was left. Lovely description. Chapter 17. We're going to continue on with this story that remember, a poet is telling at this celebration. Finn released a few of his soldiers, allowed them to return to their distant towns and estates. Hengist, so I'm just going to pause here for a minute. Remember I told you the back of the book, you've got that lovely glossary of names. And there's quite a few names here that you probably need to look up. Hengist is this Danish warrior. Hengist lived the whole stormy winter through, there with Finn, look at this, whom he hated. But his heart lived in Denmark, which he and the other survivors could not visit, could not sail to, as long as the wind-whipped sea crashed and whirled, or while winter's cold hands froze the water hard and tied it in icy knots. They would wait for the new year, for spring to come, following the sun, melting the old year away and reopening the ocean. Winter was over. The earth grew lovely, and Hengist dreamed of his home. But revenge came first, settling his bitter feud with Finn, whose bloody sword he could never forget. He planned, he waited, wove plans, and waited. Then a Danish warrior dropped a sword in his lap. a weapon Finn and his men remembered and feared. And the time had come, and Hengist rose, hearing the Danes murmur, and drove his new sword into Finn's belly, butchering that king under his own roof. And the Danes rose, their hearts full of Finn's treachery and the misery he'd brought them, their sword arms restless and eager. The hall they'd shared with their enemies ran red with enemy blood, and bodies rolled on the floor beside Finn. So the Danes are getting revenge. They took the queen, who looted everything they could find that belonged to her dead husband, loaded their ship with rings, necklaces, shining jewels, wonderfully worked, and sailed, bringing treasure and a willing captive to the land she'd left and had longed for, alone no longer. Now back to present time. The singer finished his song. His listeners laughed and drank their pleasure loud in that hall. The cupbearers hurried with their sparkling vessels, and then the queen, Raffel, this is Hrothgar's wife, wearing her bright crown, appeared among them, and came to Hrothgar and Hrothulf, his nephew, seated peacefully together, their friendship and Hrothulf's good faith still unbroken. And Unferth sat at Hrothgar's feet. Everyone trusted him and believed in his courage, although he'd spilled his relative's blood. Then Raffel spoke. Accept this cup, my lord and king. May happiness come to the Danes, great ring-bearer. May the gates receive mild words from your mouth, words they have earned. Let gifts flow freely from your open hands, treasures your armies have brought you from all over the world. I have heard that the greatest of the gates now rests in your heart like a sun. Here it stands purged, restored by his strength. Celebrate his courage. Rejoice and be generous while the kingdom sits in your palm, a people and power that death will steal. But your sons will be safe, sheltered in Hrothulf's gracious protection. That's his nephew. I'll tell you later. If fate takes their father while Hrothulf is alive, I know your nephew's kindness. I know he'll repay him in kind the goodness you have shown him. Support your two sons as you and I sustained him in his own early days. His father dead and he but a boy. Then she walked to the bench where Hrethric and Hrothmund, her two sons, sat together. Beowulf, prince of the gates, was seated between them, crossing the hall, and she sat quietly by her side. So the queen says, I know that your nephew, if you are to die early, your nephew will take the throne and he will take care of it while our sons grow. It doesn't tell us in this story, but the nephew does not. Just for your information. Now we're on 18. You can pause the video and work on your reading responses, reread, look at descriptions of the characters if you want to. When you're ready, pick it up, unpause, and we'll be at 18. They brought a foaming cup and offered it to Beowulf. It was taken and given in friendship, and he was given a mail shirt and golden armbands, and the most beautiful necklace known to men. We're going to get a little bit of history on the necklace here. Nowhere in any treasure hoard anywhere on earth was there anything like it. Not since Hema carried the Brosing's necklace home to his glorious city, saved its tight carved jewels and his skin and his soul from Ermric's treachery. And then came to God. Hyglac had it next, Swerting's grandson. Defending the golden hoard his battled hard hands had won for him. The gate's proud king lost it, was carried away by fate when too much pride made him feud with the Frisians. He had asked for misery, it was granted him. He'd borne those precious stones on his ship's broad back. He fell beneath his shield, his body, and a shining coat of mail. And that necklace all lay for the Franks to pluck, for jackal warriors to find when they walked through the rows of corpses. Gates and their king lay slaughtered wherever the robbers looked. So there's kind of history to this necklace, kind of passed from king to king. The warriors shouted, and Wealhtheow spoke, Wear these bright jewels, beloved Beowulf. Enjoy them, and the rings, and the gold, O fortunate young warrior. Grow richer. Let your fame and your strength go hand in hand. and lend these two boys, her sons, your wise and gentle heart. I will remember your kindness. Your glory is too great to forget. It will last forever wherever the earth is surrounded by the sea, the winds home, and waves lap at its walls. Be happy for as long as you live. Your good fortune warms my soul. Spread your blessed protection across my son and my king's son. You're kind of getting this picture of what the Anglo-Saxons valued, right? They valued this brotherhood. They had a name for it. It's called Mannerbund. I think I'm saying that right. Kind of sounds like man bun. And it was this just brotherhood. And look what she says to him. All men speak softly here. Speak mildly and trust their neighbors. Protect their Lord. Our loyal followers who would fight as joyfully as they drink. May your heart help you do as I ask. So kind of that brotherhood is what she's speaking about. She returned to her seat. The soldiers ate and drank like kings. The savage fate decreed for them hung dark and unknown what would follow after nightfall. When Hrothgar withdrew from the hall, sought his bed and left his soldiers to theirs. Herod would house a host of men that night, as it had been meant to do. They stacked away the benches, spread out blankets, pillows, but those beer-drinking sleepers lay down with death beside their beds. They slept with their shining shields at the edge of their pillows. The hall was filled with helmets hanging near motionless heads. Spears stood by their hands. Their hammered mail shirts covered their chests. It was the Danes' custom to be ready for war, wherever they rested, at home or in foreign lands, at their lord's quick call if he needed them. If trouble came to their king, they knew how soldiers must live. That's the end of 18. We'll read 18. Pause it if you need to. We're about to see the second battle. So we know that the first one was Beowulf fighting with the monster Grendel. Well, he hasn't seen anything yet. Grendel has a mama, and she is going to come and get her revenge. So we pick up the story at 19. They sank into sleep. The price of that evening's rest was too high for the Dane who bought it with his life, paying as others had paid when Grendel inhabited Heorot, the hall till his crimes pulled him into hell. And now it was known that a monster had died, but a monster still lived and meant revenge. She'd brooded on her loss. Misery had brewed in her heart, that female horror, Grendel's mother, living in the murky, cold lake assigned her since Cain had killed his own brother, slain his father's son with an angry sword. God drove him off, outlawed him to the dry and barren desert, and branded him with a murderer's mark, and he bore a race of fiends accursed like their father. So Grendel was drawn to Heorot, an outcast come to meet the man who awaited him. He'd snatched at Beowulf's arm, but that prince remembered God's grace and the strength he'd given him and relied on the Lord for all the help, the comfort, and the support he would need. He killed the monster as God had meant him to do, tore the fiend apart, and forced him to run as rapidly as he could towards death cold waiting hands. This is all kind of like review of what happened. His mother's sad heart and her greed drove her from the den on the dangerous pathway of revenge. So she reached Heorot, where the Danes slept as though already dead. Her visit ended their good fortune, reversed the bright vein of their luck. No female, no matter how fierce, could have come with a man's strength, fought with the power and courage men fight with, smashing their shining swords, their bloody hammer-forged blades onto boar-headed helmets, slashing and stabbing with the sharpest of points. The soldiers raised their shields and drew those gleaming swords, swung them above the piled-up benches, leaving their mail shirts and their helmets where they'd lain when the terror took hold of them. To save her life, she moved still faster, took a single victim, and fled from the hall. Running to the moors, discovered, but her supper assured, sheltered in her dripping claws, she had taken Hrothgar's closest friend, the man he most loved of all the men on earth. She had killed a glorious soldier, cut a noble life short. No gate could have stopped her. Beowulf and his band had been given better beds. Sleep had come to them in a different hall. Then all Heorot burst into shouts. She had carried off Grendel's claw. Sorrow had returned to Denmark. They'd traded deaths, Danes and monsters, and no one had won. Both had lost. The wise old king trembled in anger and grief. His dearest friend and advisor dead. Beowulf was sent for at once. A messenger went swiftly to his room and brought him. He came, his band about him as dawn was breaking through. The best of all warriors walking to where Hrothgar sat waiting. The gray-haired king wondering if God would ever end this misery. The gates tramped quickly through the hall. Their steps beat and echoed in the silence. Beowulf rehearsed the words he would want with Hrothgar. He would ask the Danes' great lord if all were at peace. The night had passed quietly. 20. Hrothgar answered him, protector of his people. There's no happiness to ask about. Anguish has descended on the Danes. Esher is dead. Irmlef's older brother and my own most trusted counselor and friend. My comrade, when we went into battle, who'd beaten back enemies' swords standing at my side. All my soldiers should be as he was, their hearts as brave, and as wise. Another wandering fiend has found him in Heorot, murdered him, fled with his corpse. He'll be eaten, his flesh become a horrible feast. And who knows where the beast may be hiding, its belly stuffed full. She's taking revenge for your victory over Grendel, for your strength, your mighty grip in that monster's death. Oh, for years he'd been preying on my people. You came, he was dead in a single day. Now there's another one, a second hungry fiend, determined to avenge the first. A monster willing and more than able to bring us more sorrow. Or so it must seem to the many men mourning that noble treasure giver. For all men were treated nobly by those hands now forever closed. I've heard that my people, peasants working in the fields, have seen a pair of such fiends wandering the moors and marshes, giant monsters living in those desert lands. And they've said to my wise men that, as well as they could see, one of the devils was a female creature. The other, they say, walked through the wilderness like a man, but mightier than any man. They were frightened, and they fled, hoping to find help in Heorot. They named the huge one Grendel. If he had had a father, no one knew him, or whether there had been others before these two. Hidden evil before hidden evil. They live in secret places, windy cliffs, wolf dens, where water pours from the rocks and runs underground, where mist steams like black clouds, and the groves of trees growing out over their lake are all covered with frozen spray and wind down snake-like roots that reach as far as the water and help keep it dark. At night, the lake burns like a torch. No one knows its bottom. No wisdom reaches such depths. A deer, hunted through the woods by packs of hounds, a stag with great horns, though driven through the forest from faraway places, prefers to die on those shores, would refuse to save its life in that water. It isn't far, nor is it a pleasant spot. When the wind stirs in storms, waves splash toward the sky, as dark as the air, as black as the rain that the heavens weep. Our only help again lies with you. Grendel's mother is hidden in her terrible home, in a place you've not seen. Seek it if you dare. Save us once more. And again, twisted gold, heaped up ancient treasure will reward you for the battle you win. Should he go? Should he go seek out Grendel's mother? 21. Beowulf spoke. Let your sorrow end. It is better for us all to avenge our friends and not mourn them forever. Each of us will come to the end of this life on earth. He who can earn it should fight for the glory of his name. Fame after death is the noblest of goals. Arise, guardian of this kingdom. Let us go as quickly as we can and have a look at this lady monster. I promise you this, she'll find no shelter. No hole in the ground, no towering tree, no deep bottom of a lake where her sins can hide. Be patient for one more day of misery. I ask for no longer. The old king leapt to his feet, gave thanks to God for such words. Then Hrothgar's horse was brought, saddled and bridled. The Danes' wise ruler rode. Stately and splendid, shield-bearing soldiers marched at his side. The monster's tracks led them through the forest. They followed her heavy feet that had swept straight across the shadowy wasteland. Her burden, the lifeless body of the best of Hrothgar's men. The trail took them up towering rocky hills and over narrow, winding paths they had never seen. Down steep and slippery cliffs where creatures from deep in the earth hid in their holes. Hrothgar rode in the front with a few of his most knowing men to find their way. Then suddenly, where clumps of trees bent across cold gray stones, they came to a dismal wood. Below them was the lake, its water bloody and bubbling. And the Danes shivered. Miserable, mighty men, tormented by grief, seeing there on that cliff above the water Escher's bloody head. Ew. They looked down at the lake, felt how its heat rose up, watched the waves, blood-stained, swirling. This is like weird, right? Wonderfully crazy, weird, which is very medieval, very exciting here. Let me find my place. The battle horns sounded, then sounded again. Then they set down their weapons. They could see the water crawling with snakes. This reminds me of like Indiana Jones times 100. Fantastic serpents swimming in the boiling lake, and sea beasts lying on the rocks, the kind that infest the ocean in the early dawn, often ending some ship's journey with their wild jaws. They rushed angrily out of sight when the battle horns blew. Beowulf aimed an arrow at one of the beasts, swimming sluggishly away, and the point pierced its hide, stabbed to its heart. Its life leaked out, death swept it off. Quickly, before the dying monster could escape, they hooked its thrashing body with their curved boar spears, fought it to land, drew it up on the bluff, then stood and stared at the incredible wave roamer. And a great name for a snake, a wave roamer. That's an ancient device called a kenning. Covered with strange scales and horrible. Then Beowulf began to fasten on his armor, not afraid for his life, but knowing the woven mail with its hammered links could save that life when he lowered himself into the lake. Keep slimy monster's claws from snatching at his heart. Preserve him for the battle he was sent to fight. Hrothgar's helmet would defend him. That ancient shining treasure, encircled with hard-rolled metal, set there by some smith's long-dead hand, would block all battle swords, stop all blades from cutting at him when he'd swum toward the bottom, gone down in the surging water deep toward the swirling sands. And Unferth, interesting, Unferth helped him. Hrothgar's courtier lent him a famous weapon, a fine-hilted old sword named Hrunting. It had an iron blade etched and shining and hardened in blood. No one who'd worn it into battle, swung it in dangerous places, daring and brave, had ever been deserted. Kind of this mystical sword. Now it was Beowulf's journey the first time it was taken to an enemy's was Beowulf's journey the first time it was taken to an enemy's camp, or asked to support some hero's courage and win him glory. Unferth had tried to forget his greeting to Beowulf, his drunken speech of welcome. A mighty warrior, he lent his weapon to a better one. Only Beowulf would risk his life in that lake. Unferth was afraid, gave up that chance to work wonders and win glory and a hero's fame. But Beowulf and fear were strangers. He stood ready to dive into battle. Would you jump in that lake? Bubbling with snakes and not sure I would. Here we go. Beowulf's going to kind of share last words before he jumps in. 22. We're going to make it to 25. So this is a bit of a longer video. Pause it whenever you feel you need to, and then just pick it up if you want to read along together, okay? Then Edgelow's brave son spoke. That's Beowulf. Remember, Hrothgar, O knowing king, now when my danger is near, the warm words we uttered. If your enemy should end my life, then be, O generous prince, forever the father and protector of all whom I leave behind me here in your hands. My beloved comrades, left with no leader, their leader dead. And the precious gifts you give me, my friend, send them to Hygelac, that's his king. May he see in their golden brightness the gate's great lord gazing at your treasure, that here in Denmark I found a noble protector, a giver of rings, whose rewards I won and briefly relished. And you, Unferth, let my famous old sword stay in your hands. I shall shape glory with Hrunting, or death will hurry me from this earth. As his words ended, he leapt into the lake, would not wait for anyone's answer. What? The heaving water covered him over. For hours, he sank through the waves like Superman. At last he saw the mud of the bottom. And all at once, the greedy she-wolf who'd ruled those waters for 100 years discovered him. Saw that a creature from above had come to explore the bottom of her wet world. She welcomed him in her claws, clutched at him savagely, but could not harm him. Tried to work her fingers through the tight ring-woven mail on his breast, but tore and scratched in vain. Then she carried him, armor and sword and all, to her home. He struggled to free his weapon and failed. The fight brought other monsters swimming to see her catch, a host of sea beasts who beat at his mail shirt, stabbing with tusks and teeth as they followed along into someone's battle hall. And there the water's heat could not hurt him, nor anything in the lake attack him through the building's high arching roof. A brilliant light burned all around him, the lake itself like a fiery flame. So she pulls him into his cavern. Then he saw the mighty water witch and swung his sword, his ring-marked blade, straight at her head. The iron sang its fierce song, sang Beowulf's strength. But her guest discovered that no sword could slice her evil skin. Hrunting could not hurt her. It was useless now when he needed it. They wrestled. She ripped and tore and clawed at him, bit holes in his helmet. And that too failed him. For the first time in years of being worn to war, it would earn no glory. It was the last time anyone would wear it. But Beowulf longed only for fame, leapt back into battle. He tossed his sword aside, angry. The steel-edged blade lay where he dropped it. If weapons were useless, he'd use his hands, the strength in his fingers. So fame comes to the men who mean to win it and care about nothing else. He raised his arms and seized her by the shoulder. Anger doubled his strength. He threw her to the floor. She fell, Grendel's fierce mother, and the gate's proud prince was ready to leap on her, but she rose at once and repaid him with her clutching claws, wildly tearing at him. He was weary, that best and strongest of soldiers. His feet stumbled, and in an instant she had him down, held, helpless, squatting with her weight on his stomach. She drew a dagger, brown with dried blood, and prepared to avenge her only son. But he was stretched on his back, and her stabbing blade was blunted by the woven mail shirt he wore on his chest. The hammered links held. The point could not touch him. He'd have traveled to the bottom of the earth, Edgelow's son, and died there if that shining woven metal had not helped. And holy God, who sent him victory, gave judgment for truth and right, ruler of the heavens, once Beowulf was back on his feet and fighting. All right, up to this point, has anything helped Beowulf? Look at 23. Pause if you need to, and then we'll start 23. 23. Then he saw, hanging on the wall, right, a heavy sword hammered by giants, strong and blessed with their magic, the best of all weapons, but so massive that no ordinary man could lift its carved and decorated length. He drew it from its scabbard, broke the chain on its hilt, and then, savage, now angry and desperate, lifted it high over his head and struck with all the strength he had left. He caught her in the neck and cut it through, broke bones and all. Her body fell to the floor, lifeless. The sword was wet with her blood, and Beowulf rejoiced at the sight. The brilliant light shone suddenly as though burning in that hell, and as bright as heaven's own candle lit the sky. He looked at her home, then followed along the wall, went walking, his hands tight on the sword, his heart still angry. He was hunting another dead monster, and took his weapon with him for final revenge against Grendel's vicious attacks. His nighttime raids over and over, coming to Heorot when Hrothgar's men slept, killing them in their beds, eating some of them on the spot, 15 or more, and running to his loathsome moor with another such sickening meal waiting in his pouch. But Beowulf repaid him for those visits. He found him lying dead in his corner, armless, exactly as that fierce fighter had sent him out from Heorot, then struck off his head with a single swift blow. The body jerked for the last time and then lay still. The wise old warriors who surrounded Hrothgar, like him, staring into the monster's lake, they saw the waves surging and the blood spurting through. They spoke about Beowulf. All the graybeards whispered together and said hope was gone, that the hero had lost fame and his life at once, and would never return to the living or come back as triumphant as he had left. Almost all agreed that Grendel's mighty mother, the Shiwa, had killed him. The sun slid over past noon, went further down. The Danes gave up, left the lake, and went home, Hrothgar with them. The Gates stayed. Those are Beowulf's men. They stayed. Sat sadly watching, imagining they saw their lord, but not believing they would ever see him again. Then the sword melted, blood-soaked, dripping down like water, disappearing like ice when the world's eternal lord loosens invisible fetters and unwinds icicles and frost as only he can. He who rules times and seasons, he who is truly God. The monster's hall was full of rich treasures, but all that Beowulf took was Grendel's head and the hilt of the giant's jeweled sword. The rest of that ring-marked blade had dissolved in Grendel's steaming blood, boiling even after his death. And then the battle's only survivor swam up and away from those silent corpses. Now look what happens to this lake. He's killed Grendel's mother. The water was calm and clean. The whole huge lake peaceful once the demons who lived in it were dead. No more blood, no more bubbling water, no more snakes, no more boiling, no more sea monsters. Then that noble protector of all seamen swam to land, rejoicing in the heavy burdens he was bringing with him. He and all his glorious band of Gates thanked God that their leader had come back unharmed. They left the lake together. The Gates carried Beowulf's helmet and his mail shirt. Behind them, the water slowly thickened. As the monster's blood came seeping up, they walked quickly, happily across roads all of them remembered. Left the lake and the cliffs along it, brave men staggering under the weight of Grendel's skull, too heavy for fewer than 4 of them to handle, 2 on each side of the spear jammed through it, yet proud of their ugly load and determined that the Danes seated in Heorot should see it. Soon 14 Gates arrived at the hall, bold and warlike, and with Beowulf, their lord and leader, they walked on the mead hall green. Then the Gates' brave prince entered Heorot, covered with glory for the daring battles he had fought. He sought Hrothgar to salute him and show Grendel's head. He carried that terrible trophy by the hair, brought it straight to where the Danes sat. drinking, the queen amongst them. It was a weird and wonderful sight, and the warriors stared. The end of 23. We have just a few short pages to go for our week's reading. I'm going to do 24 and 25. Again, feel free to pause it and do your work that goes along with the chapter. Just a little bit of thinking about the characters. And when you're ready, if you want to join in again with 24 and 25, we'll just be finished here in just a few minutes. Beowulf spoke. This is 24. Hrothgar, behold, great Healfdene's son, this glorious sign of victory brought you by joyful gates. My life was almost lost, fighting for it, struggling underwater. I'd have been dead at once and the fight finished, the she-devil victorious, if our Father in heaven had not helped me. Hrunting, Unferth's noble weapon, could do nothing, nor could I, until the ruler of the world showed me, hanging, shining, and beautiful on a wall, a mighty old sword. So there's nothing he can do, right? It's a hopeless situation. And miraculously, something appears from the sky. So God gives guidance to those who can find it from no one else. I used the weapon he had offered me, drew it, and when I could, swung it, and killed the monstrous hag in her own home. Then the ring-marked blade burned away as that boiling blood spilled out. I carried off all that was left, this hilt. I've avenged their crimes and the Danes they've killed. And I promise you that whoever sleeps inherits you, your brave soldiers, anyone of all the people in Denmark, old or young. They and you may now sleep without fear of either monster, mother, or son. Then he gave the golden sword hilt to Hrothgar, who held it in his wrinkled hands and stared at what giants had made, the monsters owned. It was his, an ancient weapon shaped by wonderful smiths. Now that Grendel and his mother had been driven from the earth, God's enemies scattered and dead. That best of swords belonged to the best of Denmark's rulers, the wisest ring-giver Danish warriors I'd ever known. The old king bent close to the handle of the ancient relic and saw written there the story of ancient wars between good and evil. The opening of the waters, the flood sweeping giants away, how they suffered and died, that race who hated the ruler of us all and received judgment from his hands, surging waves that found them wherever they fled. And Hrothgar saw runic letters clearly carved in that shining hilt, spelling its original owner's name, he for whom it was made, with its twisted handle and snake-like carvings. Then he spoke, Healfdene's son, and everyone was silent. What I say, speaking from a full memory and after a life spent in seeking what was right for my people, is this. This prince of the gates, Beowulf, was born a better man. Your fame is everywhere, my friend. It reaches to the ends of the earth, and you hold it in your heart wisely. Patient with your strength and our weakness. What I said I will do. In the name of the friendship we've sworn, your strength must solace your people now, and mine no longer. Be not as Hermod. Remember that guy? The bad king? He's proud. Be not as Hermod once was to my people, too proud to care what their hearts hid, bringing them only destruction and slaughter. In his mad rages, he killed them himself, comrades and followers who ate at his table. At the end, he was alone. He knew none of the joys of life with other men. A famous ruler granted greater strength than anyone alive in his day, but dark and bloodthirsty in spirit. He shared out no treasure, showed his soldiers no road to riches and fame. And then that affliction on his people's face suffered horribly for his sins. Be taught by his lesson. Learn what a king must be. I tell his tale, old as I am, only for you. Our eternal Lord grants some men wisdom, some wealth, makes others great. The world is God's. He allows a man to grow famous and his family rich. He gives him land and towns to rule and delight in. lets his kingdom reach as far as the world runs, and who, in human unwisdom, in the middle of such power, remembers that it will all end, and too soon. Prosperity, prosperity, prosperity. Nothing troubles him, no sickness, not passing time, no sorrows, no sudden war breaking out of nowhere, but all the world turns when he spins it. How can he know when he sins? And then pride grows in his heart. So this just kind of continues. We're down to 25. And then pride grows in his heart, planted quietly, but flourishing. And while the caper of his soul sleeps on, while conscience rests and the world turns faster, a murderer creeps closer and comes carrying a tight-strung bow with terrible arrows. And those sharp points strike home, are shot in his breast under his helmet. He's helpless. And so the devil's dark urgings wound him, for he can't remember how he clung to the rotting wealth of this world, how he clawed to keep it, how he earned no honor, no glory in getting golden rings, how he forgot the future glory God gave him at his birth, and forgetting, did not care. And finally, his body fails him. These bones and flesh quickened by God fall and die, and some other soul inherits his place in heaven. Some open-handed giver of old treasures who takes no delight in mere gold. Guard against such wickedness, beloved Beowulf, best of warriors, and choose instead eternal happiness. Push away pride. Your strength, your power are yours for how many years? Soon you'll return them where they came from. Sickness or a sword's edge will end them, or a grasping fire, or the flight of a spear, or surging waves, or a knife's bite. Kind of depressing. You're going to die someday, he says. Or the terror of old age, or your eyes darkening over. It will come. Death comes faster than you think. No one can flee it. So Hrothgar is giving Beowulf this kind of talk about God and life and how we should live. So I have led the Danes for 100 years. Protected them from all peoples on this earth. My sword and my spear so ready that no one anywhere under God's high sun was eager to wage war here in Denmark. And here too, the change has come. And we wept for our dead when Grendel invaded Heorot. My enemy raided this hall. My sorrow, my grief was as great and lasting as it was helpless. Then thanks be given to God, eternal Lord of us all, you came. And that endless misery was over, and I lived now to behold this bloody head. Go in, feast. Be as happy as your fame deserves. When morning shines, we shall each have owned more of my treasures. Beowulf obeyed him, entered Heorot cheerfully, and took his place at the table. And once again, Danes and Geats feasted together, a host of famous warriors in a single hall. Then the web of darkness fell, and it was night. They rose. Hrothgar, the gray-haired old dame, was heavy with sleep, and Beowulf was glad that a bed was waiting. The bravest of warriors, exhausted with the work he'd done. A Danish servant showed him the road to that far-off quiet country where sleep would come and take him and his followers. Hrothgar's visitors were well cared for. Whatever they needed was theirs. Then Beowulf rested. Heorot rose high above him, gleaming in the darkness. The Geats slept till a black-feathered raven sang his cheerful song, and the shining sun burned away shadows. And those seafarers hurried from their beds, anxious to begin the voyage home, ready to start, their hearts already sailing on the ship's swift back. Then Unferth came, with Hrunting, his famous sword, and offered it to Beowulf, asked him to accept the precious gift. The prince took it, thanked him, and declared the weapon one he was proud to own. His words, blamed it for nothing, were spoken like the hero he was. The war gear was ready. The Geats were armored and eager to be gone. Quickly Beowulf sought Hrothgar's throne, where the king sat waiting for his famous visitors' farewell. In our next reading, we'll see Beowulf's goodbye to Hrothgar, and we will have encountered 2 of the battles. Remember, there are 3 that this story revolves around. We've encountered 2, so 1 more is yet to come. Happy reading and working on your responses to these chapters. And I look forward to seeing that next week when you bring it to class. God bless you. Have a great day.